Let us make a name for ourselves. 4 words that would change everything. The assembly had ended. Thousands of voices had roared their approval. And now the leaders gazed at the plain of Shinar stretching to the horizon. Fertile land watered by 2 rivers, the perfect place to stay together forever. God had clearly said to fill the earth, spreading out, multiplying. But the gathered men had heard those words and felt fear. Fear of dispersing. Fear of getting lost in a world too vast. So they decided to build a tower. Not just any tower. A 300-foot tower that would pierce the clouds. A tower visible from any distance. A tower that would tell the world and God himself, here we stay. And alongside that decision came another equally revolutionary. Let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They wouldn't use stone from distant mountains. They would manufacture their own materials. It was a declaration of technical independence. They didn't need what God had naturally provided. The chief architect drew up the plans. There was no precedent. Existing temples were 65 feet tall. This tower would reach 300 feet. 30 stories of brick and bitumen defying gravity. He looked at his hands. Hands that had designed cities, but never anything close to this magnitude. Hands that would coordinate thousands of workers, supervise millions of bricks, calculate tons of bitumen. They didn't consult God about the design. They didn't pray for wisdom. They didn't seek divine blessing. They simply began. And the first step was obvious but monumentally difficult. Produce enough bricks to build the impossible. The sun had barely risen when the first workers descended to the banks of the Euphrates. The cool air wouldn't last under Mesopotamia's relentless sun. Genesis records the decision with brutal economy. They said, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." Simple in appearance, revolutionary in reality. Before Babel, constructions used what God provided: stone from quarries, wood from forests. But Shinar was a plain without nearby stone. So they decided to manufacture. Transform clay into industrial material. Workers dug with simple tools, baskets filled up. The clay, soft, perfect for molding, was carried to production sites near the river. But raw clay was weak. It cracked. It would never support 300 feet of weight. That's why it had to be baked with fire. Bricks hardened in kilns at over 1,400 degrees for days. The kilns were massive structures of refractory bricks. The heat was brutal. Men regularly passed out. Burns marked hands, arms, faces. Smoke choked lungs for hours. No protection, no rest shifts. The air was nearly unbreathable. Respiratory diseases developed in those who fed the kilns day after day. But each perfect brick that emerged was a small victory. Proof of what they could achieve without divine help. Only human intelligence, coordinated work, systematized organization. Thousands of workers dedicated themselves solely to production. Quality control was strict. Defective bricks, cracked, deformed, poorly fired, were separated for internal filling. If you need millions of perfect bricks, you must manufacture even more, knowing a percentage will be discarded. Production was industrial, massive, constant. The kilns burned day and night without pause, and with each brick stacked, confidence grew. They could do it. They were self-sufficient. No one admitted that the very capacity to manufacture bricks was God's gift. The intelligence to design kilns, the strength to work, the river that provided clay, the fire that transformed mud into stone. Everything was God's grace. But they saw only human achievement. James would write later, Every good and perfect gift is from above. But the builders looked at their bricks and attributed all credit to human capacity without celestial assistance. Proverbs warned, "There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death." The first levels rose quickly. Massive base, solid, built with the best bricks. An efficient system worked perfectly. And on that foundation of self-sufficiency, they would begin something more dangerous. Vertical construction that would challenge every known physical law. The second problem wasn't making bricks, it was getting them up. To 100, 150, 300 feet without modern machines. The answer lay in ramps. Structures whose existence is confirmed by archaeologists who studied Mesopotamian ziggurats. Clear evidence of ramps or stairways built around giant towers. We don't know exactly what Babel's ramp was like, but based on similar ruins, it was probably a spiral ramp ascending around the tower as it grew. The incline carefully calculated, not too steep to prevent the ascent of loaded men, but not so gentle that it consumed unnecessary material and space. The ramp grew with the tower, being constantly extended, elevated, reinforced at each new level. It was practically a living structure that grew in parallel. Building the ramp was almost as laborious as building the tower itself. It required compacted earth, reinforcing bricks, wood for support. Entire teams dedicated themselves exclusively to this. Upward transport depended entirely on human strength. There were no efficient carts. Only men with baskets on their backs, climbing meter after meter. Each fired brick weighed 11 to 15 pounds. A basket would carry 10 to 15 bricks. A worker carried between 110 and 320 pounds on his back while climbing the inclined ramp under the 100-plus degree Mesopotamian sun. When the tower reached 260 feet, carriers needed to climb that entire distance. A journey that could take more than an hour. Deposit the bricks at the top, descend. Repeat the process dozens of times per day. The physical wear was devastating. Backs permanently curving, knees destroyed by repeated impact. But the worst was the constant danger. The ramp was narrow. Men ascending loaded in one direction, descending empty in the other. Any stumble, any brick falling from a basket created a potentially fatal domino effect. The higher the tower, the more deadly any fall. There were no side protections, no railings. Just a compacted path winding around the structure, and exhausted men walking with tons on their backs. The ramp needed to withstand the weight of hundreds, possibly thousands of men simultaneously. If the reinforcement failed, if the earth gave way, if the supporting bricks cracked, entire sections collapsed, taking everyone on them. When the bricks finally reached the top, another deadly problem appeared: the bitumen. There was a black, viscous substance that naturally seeped from Shinar's ground. Sticky, with a strong, suffocating smell when heated. Genesis 11:3 records the crucial technical decision, and they used tar for mortar. Bitumen would be the mortar that would unite millions of bricks. Bitumen had unique properties. It was waterproof, ensuring rains wouldn't weaken the structure. When heated and applied, it created an extremely strong bond, much more resistant than mud or lime. Up at the top, specialized workers received the still hot bitumen and applied it quickly between bricks before it cooled. The work required speed and precision. Once the bitumen started cooling, it became viscous until completely solid. If a brick was placed crooked, there was no correction possible. The bond was permanent, but working with hot bitumen was dangerous. Burns were constant. The boiling material splattered. Direct contact with skin caused severe damage. Constant exposure had lasting effects, chronic respiratory problems, persistent skin irritations. The applicator's hands were permanently stained black. The smell accompanied them wherever they went. And at 300 feet high, working with hot substance required absolute concentration. One mistake, one false move, and you could fall with boiling bitumen on your skin while plummeting to your death. But the bitumen sealed the bricks perfectly, irreversible, permanent, as it also sealed the fate of those who worked with it day after day without protection. And while the bitumen united the bricks, another challenge multiplied with each meter. How to coordinate thousands of men who couldn't see or hear each other. Imagine trying to give urgent instructions to someone 300 feet away. No telephone, no radio, just your voice against the wind and the noise of thousands of men working. Now imagine that a communication error could cost lives, could bring down part of the structure, could delay the work for weeks. That was the fourth brutal challenge, a problem supervisors faced every day. Coordination in Mesopotamia wasn't new. For centuries, they had built canals, temples, massive projects. They developed hierarchical systems where each worker answered to a supervisor, each supervisor to another above. But Babel presented unique challenges. It wasn't just coordinating thousands of men. It was coordinating them vertically across 300 feet of height. Whoever was at the top couldn't see or hear whoever was at the base. The wind drowned out voices. A misinterpretation could result in structural disaster. They used visual signals, flags or colored cloths waved in specific patterns, indicating when more material was needed, when there was a problem, when to pause work. Sound signals complemented. Drums, horns, whose deep sounds traveled better through the noise. Each pattern of beats indicated different instructions that everyone had to memorize and recognize instantly. The margin for error was minimal. If a supervisor misinterpreted a signal and his team positioned bricks incorrectly, while the next floor team worked based on another interpretation, the resulting misalignment would compromise structural integrity. The system worked most of the time, but the constant stress created enormous tensions. Supervisors pressuring workers, exhausted workers making mistakes, everyone living with fear that one day communication would fail at the wrong moment and the entire structure would collapse. But communication wasn't the only terror. As the tower rose, a more primitive fear dominated. The fear that the structure simply wouldn't support its own weight. There were cracks that appeared without warning, fine lines snaking through brick walls on upper floors, cracks that weren't there in the morning but emerged by afternoon. Too small at first, too numerous to ignore. Supervisors inspected regularly, measuring widths with fingers, checking if they grew, trying to determine if it was natural settling or signs of something dangerous in the construction's depths. The fifth challenge had no simple solution. It involved forces that no ancient technique could fully control. The accumulated weight of millions of bricks stacked across 300 feet. The wind that blew with increasing force as height increased. Temperature variations between the scorching sun and the night cold, making materials expand and contract in constant cycles. Wind was a constant enemy on upper floors. It blew with enough force to knock down an unwary man. It pushed against walls with variable pressure. It created tensions that pulled and pushed the structure. A perfectly vertical and rigid tower would theoretically resist better. But any small deviation, any slightly weaker section, any point where the bitumen hadn't fully adhered, became a potential failure point under strong wind. The builders tried to compensate. Wider base than the top to distribute weight. The best bricks on lower levels where pressure was greater. Constant inspection looking for problems. But deep down, each additional meter was a bet against the laws of physics. Everyone knew that eventually something would have to give. The tower would stop rising, or crack under its own weight, or partially collapse under extreme wind, or something completely unexpected would happen. And then something unexpected really did happen. But it wasn't wind or cracks or structural collapse. It was something no engineer could have predicted, something unrelated to physics or materials, something that in hours would transform the world's most organized site into total chaos. It began as normal confusion of any noisy site. A worker shouting something another didn't understand well. A supervisor repeating an order that made no sense. Small misunderstandings that happened daily and were quickly resolved. But this time the confusion didn't resolve. It spread like fire, rising through levels, descending down ramps, infecting every group with the same growing disorientation that transformed communication into chaos and organization into panic. Genesis 11:7 records the divine decision. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. The text is direct. It offers no details about how it happened. But the impact was devastating on a work that depended completely on precise coordination. A supervisor on the third level shouted instructions, and his team looked at him as if he spoke a completely foreign language, because in fact, he was. Words he had always used, that had always been understood, now sounded incomprehensible. And when his workers tried to respond, the words coming from their mouths were equally unintelligible to him. Work stopped completely. There was no way to coordinate when no one understood each other. Carriers left baskets in wrong places because they didn't understand instructions. Masons at the top ran out of materials because orders didn't reach the base. Bitumen cooled and hardened in containers because no one could communicate when more was needed. Visual signals failed. Waved flags meant nothing when groups interpreted patterns differently. Drums played coordinated nothing when each group responded to rhythms differently. Genesis 11:8 describes the result. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. The dispersion wasn't instantaneous, but was inevitable. Groups that could communicate with each other naturally clustered together. And these groups began to move away from the place where communication had become impossible and work had ceased. The tower remained unfinished, a giant, useless structure. Testimony to human ambition interrupted by divine intervention. Millions of bricks stacked that would never reach their purpose. Years of work and countless lives consumed. But now it would remain forever incomplete. Genesis 11:9 explains. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Babel, from Balal, to confuse, to mix. The silence that descended in the following days was different from any previous silence. It wasn't the silence of nightly rest. It was the silence of abandonment. Tools left where they were, deserted ramps, kilns going out. An ambition defeated not by technical limitations, but by something no human planning could have predicted. God's will manifested through the confusion of languages. the tower remained. 300 feet of architectural rebellion. But its lesson was clear. Technical self-sufficiency without God is illusion. Every capacity is divine gift. Pretending achievements are purely ours is pride. Horizontal unity without vertical axis is dangerous. Perfect coordination without God multiplies capacity for rebellion. Making a name for ourselves is vanity. There is only one name that deserves to be exalted. Security fabricated by human hands instead of trust in divine promises is unbelief. Attempting to reach heaven by our own means repeats the original sin, and Genesis 11:5 captures the devastating irony. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower. The tower designed to reach heaven was so low that God had to descend to see it. 300 feet from human perspective, impressive, impossible. 300 feet from divine perspective, insignificant, pathetic. But Babel's story didn't end when the workers dispersed. Because the spirit of Babel, building without God, uniting without the Creator, making a name for ourselves, securing the future without divine promises, never died. Revelation 17:5 speaks of Babylon the Great, not just ancient city. It's a system, a mentality, civilization built on the same principles. And Revelation 18:2, fallen is Babylon the Great. Babel 1.0 fell when God confused languages. Babel 2.0 will fall when Christ returns. And meanwhile, every tower we build faces the same question. Is it founded on obedience to God or on human pride? Psalm 127:1 remains true. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. We can have impressive technology, perfect coordination, unlimited ambition. But if God is not at the center, if we don't build for His glory, if our goal is to make a name for ourselves instead of exalting His, then our tower, no matter how high it rises, will remain eternally incomplete. And the silence that will descend upon our works will be the silence of divine judgment on the architecture of arrogance. The question isn't, how high can you build? The question is, for whom are you building? Because there are only two options: build to make a name for yourself, or build to glorify the name above all names. Babel chose the first, and the tower remained unfinished. What will you choose?